Good afternoon, everyone. I am Dr. Hiten Saresa, medical advisor for Concord Biotech Limited. I welcome all of you to this wonderful webinar of Evolve in association with the Institute of Medicine and Law. The agenda for today's webinar is to discuss about medical legal aspects, how to safeguard the safety of doctor against any negligence suit. We have a speaker, Mr. Mahendra Kumar Bajpayee, who is the advocate at the Supreme Court of India and Honorable Director at Institute of Medicine and Law. We have our moderator, Dr. Shubal Dikshit, who is the past president at ISCCM, and he is the director ICU at Sanjeevan Hospital, Pune. So I welcome all of you for this wonderful webinar. Now I would hand over the session to Dr. Shubal Dikshit. Over to you, sir.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Hiten. Again, I would like to thank and hello, can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, sir. Yeah. We can hear you, sir.
Sorry. Good evening to everybody. And I thank the Indian Institute of Law and Concord for inviting me to moderate this excellent session. And more importantly, I was very happy to be a part of it because it's a non-COVID kind of webinar after a long time. And definitely it's going to be a very interesting one, and we have got an excellent speaker. For this, we definitely have got Advocate Mahendra Kumar Bajpayee. He's one of the leading authorities in the field of medical legal knowledge in India. He's also the editor-in-chief for the medical law cases for doctors, which is a monthly kind of bulletin which he releases on behalf of the Indian Institute of Law, and which has got one of the largest collection of actual cases. And more importantly, he's known for his excellent way he delivers his talks, and more importantly for that, the complex of the things. He's known to make the complex of the things very easy to understand for us laymen, and which is very important for us doctors where we are practicing into medicine. So we have got the advocate of the Supreme Court of India, Advocate Mr. Mahendra Kumar Bajpayee today for us. He has taken out time out of his busy schedule. As you know, he's also the director of the Indian Institute of Law, and we've got him to speak on the medical legal issues which are really related and concerning with the intensive care world here. So, Advocate Mahendra Kumar Bajpayee, sir, for you. Sir, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Dikshit, for those kind words. Dear doctor friends, good afternoon. My screen is visible?
Yes, sir.
So friends, today we all are meeting here to discuss something that is not purely medicine. And as rightly put by Dr. Dikshit, something that has nothing to do with corona. Friends, law and medicine both happen to be amongst the oldest professions known to mankind. Both are dynamic, both keep on changing. And that is why their interplay happens to be very interesting. When law intervenes in medicine and when medicine intervenes in law. Medicine intervenes in law. Something that you doctors have read as medical jurisprudence, better known as forensic science. MLC cases. Law needs medicine. It is men from medical profession who will help law in understanding what has happened. or what has not happened. Similarly, law also intervenes in medicine. When the conduct of a medical professional falls below a particular standard, law is rather constrained to intervene. Whether it is a civil court, a consumer court, or a criminal court, or for that matter, even the regulator, the state medical councils. These are all interventions of law. Friends, I also know that law happens to be a big cause of concern for doctors today, not only in India, but all over the world. We all know that this corona is going to go, if not today, tomorrow, if not tomorrow, day after tomorrow.
Hello, laptop.
And then we all will be back to our old days. 2 years back, Indian Medical Association, the national body, they did a nationwide survey. Around 33,000 doctors were interviewed. And the results were startling, mind-boggling. About 82% doctors in this country are apprehensive about law, about violence. And that is why, friends, on this afternoon, we all have gathered to understand some finer aspects of this interplay of law and medicine. Friends, I will be discussing a case, a real case from Indian courts. There are 4 distinct learnings from that case. 4 distinct topics on which we can take some take-home messages. You always had questions around those topics, those issues, especially intensivists. And we'll try to answer them. I will be running a presentation. We will discuss the law around those 4 issues, and then the case. And thereafter, you all can put your questions. We have a very learned moderator, Dr. Subhal Dikshit. And we will try to answer as many questions as possible. Friends, most of the doctors, especially those who work in hospitals, those who own hospitals, and amongst them intensivists, often have this question. This dilemma is always there. The patient has acquired some infection. Whether it was there before hospitalization, whether it happened during the course of hospitalization. But the patient has acquired infection. Who is responsible? Who is liable? And whether law considers this fact that the patient has acquired infection as negligence per se or not. Friends, let me first clear your doubts about this. What is the legal situation about hospital-acquired infections, nosocomial infections? Two legal dictums. Not only in India, but world over, these dictums are true, are applicable, are good law. A doctor or a hospital is never liable simply because a patient has acquired infections during hospitalization. The patient admittedly had no infection. He acquired it in hospitalization. But merely this fact will not lead courts to an inference of negligence. This law is well settled. No doubt about it. And the underlying reason happens to be medical. Friends, one very fundamental aspect of law that you all should know. Law never comments on medicine. Law never comments on medical practice. Law merely wants doctors and hospitals to follow medical science, to follow the practice followed by reasonable doctors, to follow the algorithms laid down by law. Nothing beyond that. And your medical science says that in spite of the best precautions, the best facilities, nosocomial infections cannot come to zero. This possibility will always exist. If you believe in God, this is the way God has made us, made this whole world. And based on this aspect of medical science, the second dictum, law accepts that the possibility of hospital acquired infections will always exist, even with the best precautions, even with the best facilities. But then every day you hear about cases where a doctor or a hospital has been held negligent. And one of the reasons that is often quoted is that, oh look, the patient acquired infection in your hospital. Friends, if you decipher the judgments pronounced by the court, if you analyze them properly, you will come to only one conclusion. And that is that the hospital or the doctor was not held negligent because the patient acquired infection, but was held negligent because the actions, the protocols that had to be followed to maintain aseptic conditions, to maintain sterile conditions, were not followed in that case. You did not take appropriate precautions to prevent infections, and that is why you are held negligent, not because the patient acquired infection. So what are the do's and don'ts? Obviously, you have to take requisite steps to keep infection under control. These steps have to be in accordance with accepted medical practice, in accordance with medical science, in accordance with the algorithms laid down by medical science. This part is purely medical science. But then, friends, today, patients are suing doctors, patients are suing hospitals, and that too at an alarming rate. Keeping that in mind, you must maintain records of the action that you have taken, that you keep on taking to maintain aseptic conditions, to maintain sterility. This is not mandatory as per law. According to the law of the land, you merely have to maintain medical records of the patient only for 3 years. This is not medical records of the patient. These are records of your hospital, of your ICU. But these must also be preserved so that they can be produced in a court of law as and when an allegation is made that I got infected in your hospital and this happens to be negligence. You will be able to take a defense. Look at these records. I was taking all the precautions that are indicated, that are necessary, that are mandatory. I was following all those protocols and therefore I am not negligent. So we have got the answer. The doctor or the hospital is not negligent in the eyes of laws simply because the patient has acquired infection during hospitalization. But the doctor will have to prove, will have to show to the court that the requisite protocols were followed, the requisite actions were taken to prevent infection. That is all. The second dilemma, again, something that happens quite often in an ICU setup. In the initial few days, doctor's fees, the hospital's charges are paid regularly, promptly. But as days go by, the bills keep mounting and the money does not come. What do you do? Can you discharge a patient who is on ventilator simply because the fees has not been paid? And what should be done when the patient is either dead or is discharged? One simple way which everyone does in normal day-to-day living is to withhold the other person's property. I will not return back your car till you give back my money. Very normal. So can a doctor or hospital say, I will not give the dead body of the patients to you all, first pay my money? Or fair enough, I hand over the body, but I will not give you medical records because you have not paid my fees. You wanted a discharge against medical advice, I am giving you, but I will not give you a discharge card. This will force you to come back and pay my money. What is wrong in it? Is it permissible? Or is there any other way by which we can recover our legal dues? Perfectly legal. What is the legal way? And friends, this part of medical practice, this part of law relating to medical practice happens to be very unfortunate. Unfortunate because there is no solution, no practical solution inside. Law is very clear. Law says, yes, every patient is bound to pay fees to a doctor or a hospital. Ultimately, the doctor-patient relationship today is a contract. The doctor agrees to give his expertise. manage the patient to the best of his or her abilities. The patient promises to pay fees. But if after taking the services, the patient does not pay the fees, legally speaking, it is a breach of contract. Yes, it is a breach of contract. What is the remedy? And the only legal remedy in case of non-payment happens to be the doctor or the hospital can approach a civil court, file a simple suit for recovery of money. That is all, nothing beyond that. And friends, as a lawyer, if I say this is an impractical solution, all those of you who have experience of court will agree with it. Recovering money in a civil suit in India could go from 20 years to 40 years. The advocate's fees, the time, money, energy that you will be wasting. But friends, beyond this, there is no other remedy. There is no other way out. I'm talking about legal ways. Illegally, yes, there could be many ways. Quick, instant. And please see the other side of the law. Law is absolutely clear in India that non-payment of fees cannot be a legally valid ground for withholding dead body of the patient, not giving a discharge summary, not giving medical records after discharge. You cannot. Probably the only way out, the only practical way out is to keep enough advances. But then we know, all of us are aware, there are instances where the relatives simply disappear. Now, what do you do with a patient on ventilator where the relatives have disappeared? Law does not give you a right to shut the ventilator. Law does not give you a right to pull off the ventilator, to transfer a patient on ventilator to another hospital without attendants, without relatives. Friends, in this unfortunate situation, the only legally advisable protocol that should be followed, although I'm sure this will not give you results in recovering money, but it will certainly help you in a court of law. Because most of the cases that reach court, the genesis happens to be financial aspect. If not most, many of the cases. And in such cases, you will be able to defend yourself properly. What should you do? Yes, you should take an acknowledgement from the patient, from the attendants, that fees are unpaid. Take a letter from them. I have taken a discharge, or I'm taking the dead body, this much money is due and payable. I don't have any dispute on this amount. We will pay it in 3 months, 6 months time, whatever this. Take this, keep it. We lawyers call it acknowledgement of debt. But I'm very clear. This will not help you in recovering your money. The second aspect should be, you should be sending a registered letter, acknowledgement due to the patient or the relatives, demanding fees after a few months. And once you have received the acknowledgement, please preserve it. Both these pieces of evidence will certainly help you in a court of law. When you or your attorney stands up in a court of law and says that the real reason for coming before the court happens to be non-payment of fees, You have something to show to the court. A consumer court does not have the requisite powers to direct that patient, you first give money. No. It can hold you responsible for negligence. But enforcement of a contract, you will have to go to a civil court. And friends, do not withhold dead body of a patient. Do not withhold a discharge card, a transfer note, medical records for non-payment of fees. It is simply not permissible. So the answer to our dilemma, the legal options available to a doctor to recover fees, a civil suit, but an impractical solution. No one does it, not even the best of the corporate hospitals. And can a doctor or a hospital withhold a dead body of a patient, medical records, discharge card for non-payment? No. The third proposition, the third dilemma that we will discuss. Very important for intensivists, especially the ones that are operating in smaller hospitals. Diagnostic facilities are not there in your hospital. You don't have an in-house MRI facility, an in-house CT scan facility, or even an X-ray facility. You have to, patient is in ICU, is critical. But getting those diagnostic tests done are also critical. Or the patient has to be transferred to a higher center. You will need ambulance. Who will be responsible for the ambulance services? The hospital. And in all circumstances, no. For there are many situations. A hospitalized patient going out for MRI, obviously the hospital has to provide an ambulance, whether it is your own ambulance or you hire an ambulance. But what happens when you are transferring a patient? And the patient's relatives say, no, we will get our ambulance. You will have to permit them. But then for their ambulance, are you responsible? And then there is a third category. Patient who has taken discharge against medical advice, leave against medical advice, Dama Lama patient. Are you still bound legally to provide that patient with an ambulance to take him to another hospital? What is the hospital's responsibility for ambulance? Let us understand the legal dictums. First of them, hospital is legally responsible only for the ambulance hired, provided by the hospital. Whether it is for investigations, whether it is to transfer the patient to another hospital. The hospital will have to hire an ambulance if the relatives say no, if the attendants say no. Part of your duty. Patient is admitted with you. And when you hire such an ambulance, when you provide such an ambulance, you obviously are legally responsible to hire a proper ambulance to ensure that you take care of the patient in transit. Complete responsibility is on the hospital. But then there is a second category. Whether it is for investigations or transfer, the patients or attendants, they want to hire an ambulance. Should you outrightly say no? No. If they want, you don't have your in-house ambulances, you can obviously permit them. But then are you legally liable? No. If they have not hired a proper ambulance and they insist that they want to take the patient in that ambulance, you just have to follow certain protocols and let them do. There is obviously a third category, patient who has been discharged against medical advice. And friends, here there is no responsibility, legal or otherwise, on the hospital to provide ambulance services. In fact, even if you have your own ambulance, you may very well say no. Many hospitals have the unwritten protocol. You have taken Dama Lama, we will not give you our ambulance. Perfectly legal. Ethical or not is a different story. Help must obviously be given. Help in getting an ambulance, help in getting a proper ambulance, help in effecting a transfer, a proper transfer. Care in transit. So the answer for all these dilemmas, the hospital has to ensure that the ambulance that is hired, that is provided, has the requisite facilities, has the requisite equipments. If a doctor is required, senior or junior, the doctor is there. Or if a nurse is required, the nurse is there to take care of the patient in transit. And this will depend on the patient's condition. No hard and fast rule. And this aspect, what was the type of ambulance which was hired? Who all were there with the patient in transit must be specifically recorded in the patient's medical record. This aspect, the second aspect, is for the courts. In case of patients who have taken Dama, and if they hire their own ambulance, then make it a protocol that while completing Dama Lama formalities, you also take an acknowledgement that the patient will be hiring their own ambulance and not yours. So yes, in some circumstances, the hospital is legally responsible, especially when the ambulance has been provided to the hospital. In fact, there is a legal responsibility in some situations to provide an ambulance. But if the patients or the air attendants have brought an ambulance, then obviously the hospital is not responsible, especially in Dama Lama cases. But the hospital will also have to ensure that the ambulance in which the patient is getting transferred has the requisite facilities, has doctors and nurses. That responsibility obviously is there on the hospital. The fourth one, what are the facilities that must be present in a hospital that has an ICU facility? Obviously, you are intensivist. And this dilemma started 1.5 years back when the Honorable Supreme Court gave a judgment that in all cases where a surgery takes place, that hospital must have an ICU. Misinterpreted, but nevertheless, it was the talk of the town, and even today, many doctors and hospitals, they carry this wrong notion. So what does the Supreme Court have to say about the facilities? I have an ICU. What all should be there? And are there any precautions that must be taken? I want to be legally safe. I want to be on the right side of the law. So friends, let me clarify one thing. Supreme Court has not prescribed or enumerated facilities for any hospital, for any ICU. Misinterpretation of that judgment. No court in India has the authority to prescribe or enumerate the facilities. They don't have the jurisdictions. It can be done by the government of the day, by bringing in laws. Some attempt has been made in Clinical Establishment Act. Good, bad, ugly, but they have prescribed the facilities that must be there. But then that act is not applicable across the country. Even if that act was applicable, the facilities of the hospital will depend on the location where the hospital is there, the level of that hospital, primary, secondary, tertiary, super specialty, the fees that you are charging. All these factors will have to be taken into account. Court has no role to play. But then, when you are running a hospital, when you are running an ICU, you have to ensure that the minimum facilities, again, prescribed, accepted by medical science, by medical practice, and that are necessary for a particular condition must be present. Admitting a patient, when you admittedly don't have those facilities, that infrastructure is negligence per se. So what should you do or not do? Ensure that the requisite facilities are present, and that too in working condition before accepting a patient. You have assessed the patient. You come to a particular diagnosis. Be sure that you have the requisite facilities. And it is advisable that the patient should be informed about the facilities that are available in the hospital at the time of admission. You should do it suo motu, on your own. Take acknowledgement. All these facilities can be written in the admission form, on the back side of the admission form. You can take a signature. It could be a separate form, a separate informative brochure that you give to the patient. These are the facilities that are there. I don't have MRI. It's not necessary to write what you don't have. You just write, these are the things that I have. That's all. Now the patient is well informed. Tomorrow in a court of law, he cannot go and say, no, I was not knowing what is there, what is not there. You were informed, you have acknowledged. Putting signboards at prominent places, like entrance, reception, where these facilities are enumerated. Good option. So what are the facilities that must be present? Supreme Court or any other court in India will not comment on these aspects. And the precautions that must be taken, you must inform the patient specifically of the facilities that are there, and you too have to take a judgment call. Whether for this condition, for this patient, do I have the necessary facilities, necessary infrastructure, and then only admit. Friends, one more important message before we go further. Please remember that law happens to be specialty neutral. I often come across doctors, many of them my friends. Doctor, you happen to be a gynecologist. Why did you not attend that seminar, that webinar? done by Orthopedic Society. But that was for orthopedics. I am a gynecologist. Friends, please understand, law has to be treated differently, medicine differently. Medicine is condition specific. Law is not condition specific. Law has nothing to do with medical science, in fact. Law only looks into one aspect, whether you have followed the protocols laid down by medical science or not. And if not, whether your action or inaction has in any way compromised with patient safety. That's all. Entire law relating to medicine can be divided into three parts. Law relating to hospitals, law relating to facilities, to ICUs, to operation theaters. So if you happen to be the owner of a hospital, if you happen to be a hospital administrator, these laws are important for you. How to admit a patient, how to discharge a patient. Then there are laws pertaining to surgeries. And it is not relating to either an orthopedic surgeon or a gynecologist. In legal parlance, it is pre-surgery precaution, post-surgery precaution, intra-surgery precaution. Whether you have taken, not taken, whether you have followed those protocols or not. And then whatever remains, that is general. Applicable to everyone, whether you are a hospital administrator, a surgeon, or a physician. Everyone has to write a prescription. Everyone has to advise investigations. Everyone has to accept a patient who needs emergency care. So friends, depending upon your practice, whether it is surgical, whether it is non-surgical, whether you are involved with hospital administration, please attend webinars, seminars, subscribe to literature, but don't treat law the way you treat medicine. Both are different. Hence the case discussion, a case from Punjab State Consumer Commission, which was reported in 10 MLCD J421. The judgment was in favor of the doctor. Facts of the case, nothing very unusual. Patient, an elderly man with known complaints of diabetes, mellitus, hypertension, and with a history of CABG, open heart surgery, is brought in an unconscious state to the hospital, admitted straight away in the ICU, where the doctor diagnoses him with meningitis. Next day, a CT scan is performed and it confirms the diagnosis. On the very next day, again, an MRI is advised. Patient is taken to another center by a cardiac ambulance because this hospital does not have MRI facilities. Patient is brought back. Thereafter, patient's condition worsens, develops septicemia and other related complications, and within a month of hospitalization, the patient dies. The relatives make many allegations. The prominent amongst them, the patient developed septicemia from hospital infection, and this led to multi-organ failure. Next, patient was sent for MRI in an ambulance that was not fit to carry a critical patient. Patient was there in the ICU. The dead body of the patient was not released till the time the relatives paid all the hospital dues. And this hospital claimed to be a multi-speciality hospital, but they did not even have MRI facilities. Then there were other allegations like patient's treatment for meningitis was started on the day of admission, but why did they do CT scan on the next day? Then the treating doctor was a cardiologist. For meningitis, a neurologist ought to have been there. Patient was made to pay twice for MRI, proper accounts were not given. All sorts of allegations were made. 4 pointed defenses were taken by the hospital. It said that patient was sent for MRI in a cardiac ambulance with a doctor and nurse present. Number 2, patient was brought in an unconscious state. And treatment was started by cardiologist and a neurologist, both. Medical records were shown. And this man was an elderly man. He had underlying morbidities, prone for septicemia. And very clearly they said, we did not hold the dead body, withhold the dead body because dues were not paid. So as far as allegations of ambulance were concerned, court did not take cognizance of that allegation. Next, the court found that the cardiologist had actually taken opinion of neurologist from day one. This aspect was appreciated. And the court agreed with the defense that risk of septicemia will be there in a person like this. And therefore, the hospital and doctors were not held negligent. So what are the take-home messages, do's and don'ts? What should you do, what you should not do? We have discussed law in great length. So as far as hospital-acquired infections are concerned, you have to take appropriate steps to control infections, maintain aseptic conditions, sterility. You also have to record it. As far as ambulances are concerned, when the hospital provides an ambulance, hires an ambulance, you have to ensure that the requisite facilities are there, equipments are there, doctors are there, nurses are there. All the drugs, etc., that may be needed in transit, depending upon the patient's condition. And this aspect has to be specifically recorded in the patient's medical records. In case of Dama Lama patient, or even non-Dama Lama patient, if the patient is hiring or their attendants are hiring their own ambulance, please take suitable endorsement or acknowledgement from them, so that at least you are not held liable for their wrongs. For unpaid fees, please do not withhold dead body of the patient. Do not withhold any medical records. We saw in this case that very specifically it was told that we did not withhold the body, and the court did believe the hospital. And what should you do when the requisite facilities infrastructure? One must ensure that the requisite facilities are present, that too in working condition before accepting the patient. And it is always advisable that the patient should be informed about the facilities that are available. Take acknowledgement right at the time of admission, putting signboards at prominent places. All these are advisable. Friends, thank you. Thank you for listening patiently.
Yes. Thank you, Bajpai sir, for an excellent talk and covering all the aspects which are related to the intensive care. Can I start off with the first question, Bajpai sir?
Sure. Sure.
Sir, one question. If we have a hospital, which is a hospital which has an intensive care unit, but unfortunately has an operating room, it is approved by the NABH standard as to level 1 accreditation, but does not have a cath lab into the hospital. Can these hospitals admit patients of acute myocardial infarction? Because I just learned that facilities should be available to handle such kind of patients. So such patients usually always come to such kind of hospitals where the primary care is being given. So can't these hospitals admit such kind of patients? The hospital doesn't have a cath lab, but has an operating room and has all other intensive care, good intensive care unit, but no cath lab.
I think there are some Government of India guidelines on patients with MI who come in emergencies. But I don't find anywhere that a cath lab is a must. Okay. It will also depend upon where exactly your hospital is situated. But this call obviously has to be taken by the hospital or the doctors who are admitting the patient. Otherwise, first aid must be given and the patient must be directed to another better facility.
Okay, like because usually as per our medical thing, they say if your hospital is equipped with a cardiac center, then preferably sometimes a PAMI or a primary angioplasty should be done. But in case if the facilities is not there, and if the transport hospital is nearby, which is say nearby within 1 kilometer or 15 minutes, you should transport it to the nearest possible center where cath lab facility is there. But therefore, in such kind of, do we still need to take it in writing from the patient that we know that there is no cath lab here and we still want to get admitted here? Is it advisable?
If you take it, it is good. But then this is your judgment call. You are the doctor.
Okay.
You know whether the patient would be able to carry on a 1 kilometer, 2 kilometer, 10 kilometers. Okay. Whether that facility where you are sending, whether it is the appropriate facility or not. So obviously you will have to take a judgment call, but taking patient's consent, obviously that mistrust Dr. Dixit, which has seeped today in the doctor-patient relationship, that obviously gets addressed to a very large extent.
Yeah,
See, we don't have a cath lab, but there is another hospital 50 kilometers far away. Now you take a call. According to us, we will try to do whatever we can do.
right. I completely agree. Or does just by enumerating that what you said, that the hospital reception should have the board which says that we don't have a cath lab, will that be sufficient enough so that we don't have to take anything in writing, but just by displaying itself, I think is a better way out that way. And is it mandatory for all hospitals to display all the facilities which are available? Is it a must? Because I've seen a lot of
So
small...
NABH accreditation, they have those norms. Now, NABH accreditation does not come within the purview of law. It's nothing legal. It is just a standard. You get yourself accredited according to those standards. Clinical Establishment Act obviously has some provisions, but then unfortunately it is not applicable across India.
Okay. Now, as you said that yes, definitely the court has not given any hospital at X facility should be made available and Y facility should be made available. Then what is the difference between the medical legal aspect and these JCI accreditations and the NABH accreditations? Because for any accreditations, they always say ki X has to be there, Y has to be there. So practically, I would give importance to a medical legal recognition, because medical legally I am going to be protected. That is more important for me, even if I don't have a JCI or a NABH accreditation. So why these kind of accreditations boast that the X facility is not there and Y is not there, and they refuse a recognition? But that's a different perspective.
So, Dr. Dixit, first understand, for an accrediting body to accredit, they have their own standards, which they feel are good for the hospital. If you follow those norms, if you come under their standards, they accredit you. And an accredited hospital has credibility. You cannot go into a court of law and say, look, because JCI said something like this and we have followed, it means whatever we have done is legally correct. No. It is not going to afford you any medical legal protection. Be absolutely sure about it. You will get medical legal protection only from two things. One, from precedents set by courts earlier. And secondly, by written law of the land. If the Government of India guidelines says something, if IMCR 2002 says something, or there is a reported judgment from the Supreme Court or the higher courts, and you have followed that, that is law. NABH, JCI, it has nothing to do with law. Let me be very clear.
Okay. Thank you, sir. That is a very useful information what you have given. Now, as far as the transfer of patients, whether it's an inter-hospital transfer or an intra-hospital transfer, I completely understood that, yes, having a hospital, if it's your own hospital ambulance, then it is our moral responsibility. In case if we hire someone, a third party one, if we have hired it, it is practically still our responsibility. But if the relatives hire it, we should take it in writing. But once we are transporting a patient, from our hospital to say scan center or to another hospital, in case if some mishap occurs in between, so are we still responsible? Is the treating doctor still responsible, or who is responsible, or the doctor?
You are responsible. in transit, you are responsible except Dama Lama cases. Dama Lama case, the moment they sign the Dama Lama forms, they complete your formality. Even though the patient happens to be in your hospital, your legal liability comes to an end, but not in other cases. In other cases, especially when you are transferring the patient, in transit, if the other hospital has not sent its ambulance and its nurse and doctors, and if you have sent your doctors and nurses, then obviously it happens to be your responsibility till the time they accept the payment.
Right. Now, there are certain private ambulances which definitely have got a cardiac care. They have got their own doctor and their own staff nurse. Now, if we transport the patient in a hired ambulance, a full cardiac ambulance where there is a doctor and a nurse, but my doctor does not go as I am the ICU in charge, is it liable that I should go there along with the patient, or oblique the doctor who is in the ambulance and the nurse in the ambulance, they come under a vicarious my responsibility, or they are on their own?
Here the biggest problem, Dr. Dikshit, you will agree with me, is whatever these cardiac ambulances may say, the doctors who are there inside are from Ayush.
I agree. I completely agree. Let's be
You
very
cannot have an MBBS doctor sitting inside an ambulance.
No.
These services will not be able to afford them.
Right.
Now, you don't have a guideline for ambulances in India.
Okay.
Okay. Now, if something happens to the patient and the relatives say, doctor, why did you send this, my patient in such an ambulance? Now, it is your responsibility first to confirm that all the equipments in that ambulance are working. One, they have the requisite ambulance. The nurse is a qualified, certified nurse. The doctor happens to be a qualified or certified doctor.
Right.
So these are the problems for which, solutions are very hard. So ultimately, the responsibility is going to boil down to you. And the second question that you put, that whether the treating doctor should personally be present in the ambulance, it will depend upon case-to-case basis. No general law.
No general law.
No general law. Nowhere has the court come to a conclusion. That much I can tell you very confidently. Indian courts have yet not hold no that the treating doctor has to go along with the patient. Not the law in India as of now.
Okay. Another question. If we have a competent doctor, for example, we are very agree that Ayush doctors sometimes, let me be very frank enough, they are quite competent enough because they spend almost large number of years in the ICU. If such a senior competent doctor accompanies, is it medico-legally safe on the hospital? Like
Ayush doctor, non-Ayush?
Ayush doctor.
No. Ayush doctor, the moment you take him for any damn thing, you are negligent in the eyes of law. Some permissions have been given by different state governments. There it's fine, you can show that notification, but you will have to vet it before employing Ayush doctor. The tragedy, Dr. Dikshit, let me be very frank with you. Very unfortunate situation.
Okay. There is one question from Mahagaukar Sangameshwar. He says that, sir, with an impractical legal resource and also the only remedy to recover money, do we concede that the legal system currently does not have any provisions for doctors or health establishments, and that there is an inherent risk in private practice? This is just an observation, and he wants your opinion or on this statement.
So why does this doctor want a lawyer to comment on law? Okay, I have already said what I had to say. Dr. Dikshit would be the right person to give his valued comment. And anyway, we have heard him speak in many conferences so I think Dr. Dikshit should be answering.
Yeah, practically speaking, I completely agree with what you have said, and that is absolutely the medical legal. The only remedy to recover is that you have to follow, and you cannot, as you said, you cannot withhold anything, and you have to follow, take it in writing what you have given, and the best option is to support, help, and be cooperative with the family, so that cooperation itself is also going to help you to recover the money in the future civil court of laws. I think that is the best way which is going to be beneficial. There's another question for you, sir, also, that do you mean to say that all counselings which are done in the intensive care unit, they have to be video recorded? It is advisable, video audio recorded?
See, it is advisable. You counsel the patient's attendants and relatives. You video record it after telling them, see, this is going to be video recorded. It's good. But there is no such mandatory provision in Indian laws that you have to record it. Please understand, there are tier 2, tier 3 cities also where having an ICU itself is a big task.
Okay. Now, that's another question is now the MRIs cannot be fumigated in this COVID era, despite wanted to avoid a COVID question. So they say that the fumigation of MRIs are very difficult. Now, in case if you are dealing with a complication which is related to COVID, where sometimes we see COVID strokes coming in, where we need ideally within the first 24 hours, the MRI is the one with picture of the diagnosis and not much people do an MRIs. So can we say that MRIs are not allowed in the era of COVID and only CT scans have been done? Is it medico-legally safe? Because a lot of scan centers refuse to do an MRI. They always do a CT scan because they say that the MRI fumigation is difficult as compared to a CT.
Now, this is that Hobson's devil and the deep sea. What do you do? But I think if the MRI is important, is absolutely necessary for that patient to arrive at a diagnosis, the doctor must take the responsibility. Documentation must be done very nicely. And I would advise such a doctor to take a second opinion from a peer also. Okay, these are the symptoms, this is all that we have got in investigations. Now my problem is, what do I do? Right. Patient anyway, if I don't treat him properly, infarct or whatever is there, he may face adverse consequences. And if he is infected with corona anyway, he will. So it is. So I have taken a decision, and these are the reasons for my decisions. And then you can obviously tell the MRI center, please go ahead, I am responsible for that. I am sending the patient for MRI. Inform this aspect to the patient's relatives.
Okay.
Probably take a written acknowledgement from them. We have received this information. Take the responsibility on you, and I am 100% sure no court in India is going to hold you negligent for something like this.
Okay. Now
this is an emergency, Dr. Dikshit, after all.
No, now they say that a pandemic. Now another thing that in between there was in the papers that in this pandemic act, if you are no cases can be filed against doctors. Is it true?
Yes, under section 4 of the Epidemic Diseases Act, no cases can be filed against a person who has followed the guidelines or advisories of the authorities given in section 3. Now, most of the government advisories that are coming, they are saying doctors to open their clinics, their hospitals. So, if required, you can take legal recourse, or that will afford legal protection to doctors to a very large extent. But the type of blanket ban on suing a doctors, which some countries have done, that is not there in India.
No, my question was again pertaining. Yeah, whether this pandemic act of this medical legal cases is applicable only for COVID cases or even for non-COVID cases. Like for example, if I do a appendectomy just for discussion, and it was a complicated appendectomy, the patient worsens and the patient has some problems and dies few days later that way. So if relatives still want to file a case, just for discussion, I am the doctor, can I tell the patient that no, you cannot file a case against me because as per Pandemic Act, it cannot be filed?
So that is what I am clarifying. Under the Epidemic Diseases Act, if the relevant authorities have given you directions, and they have given directions that hospitals must now start accepting serious patients, this is how they should be following, but they must accept critical patient. In fact, now the advisory is that even non-critical patients must be admitted. Okay, you can take support from them, but it is not that good a defense. The way there is defense in New York. In New York, they have brought a new law. No suit can be filed for doctor for any damn reason. If the doctor has discharged his or her duty for no reason, for any reason, you cannot file a case against that doctor. Now, such a blanket ban was required in India. Unfortunately, it is not there. So you will have to go and defend yourself.
Right. Another question again here. Now, especially in this pandemic act, this is again related to COVID. Lot of clinical trials have been approved by the ICMR. X drug, Y drug, Z drug, that way. So all these trials are sometimes on a trial basis, on pure compassionate kind of basis. So we do definitely take a legal consent of this patient when enrolling the patient in trial. So is the hospital or the doctor still responsible, or the government of India or ICMR which is responsible who are doing these trials? Like the Solidarity trial on convalescent plasma, where the ICMR is doing it all across the country, where you need to inform the ICMR and do it. And in case if a reaction occurs while giving this plasma, who is responsible? The ICMR, government or the hospital?
So for
I
clinical
know it's a trial drug. This is
it is
out of
clinical
the box
trials.
question.
Yeah, but for clinical trials, very elaborate procedures have been are there in place, especially consent taking agreement. Now, so you will have to look into the ICMR guidelines. What is it that they say regarding these drugs, and follow those procedures very religiously. Number two, in such cases, because for clinical trials you will have to do video counseling
Yeah,
and
I
video.
agree. I agree.
Do that and keep it. I am 100% sure no one will go to the court of law, because they anyway know that this is a trial drug.
Okay. Now, does the Indian Institute of Law have got any guidelines? This is the minimum requirement of an ICU?
No, we do not have. In fact, ISCCM should be having that, Dr. Dixit.
No, we do have it. We definitely have it.
That is good law. That is good law. That can be shown in the court of law.
Yeah.
So this is my national association. These are the guidelines of the national association, and we have followed it.
Right. Now, tomorrow, in case if another question which has also come up, you have taken in writing that he says, okay, I will pay the bill after 6 months. Now, after 6 months, so does the hospital need to wait for 6 months before sending the letter to the patient?
No. You send it. If the patient is a good patient, whether you send a letter, don't send a letter, he will come and he will pay the money. But if he is not in that tribe, then whatever number of letters you send, it's gone.
Okay. So is there any means, how many, is there like, there is one notice, third notice, you get an arrest warrant. Similarly, is there anything?
No, nothing. This is a simple notice to show in court. If the patient files a case of medical negligence. Okay. Most of these patients, this is a very recent trend, Dr. Dixit. For the last 2 years, we have seen this.
Yeah.
Okay. They don't pay fees, they ask for concessions. If they don't get it, then they go and file cases. So there it is very good. This happens to be something that really shakes the conscience of the court. Look, here is a gentleman who did not pay money. The hospital did ask for money. They did send a letter. Don't go to a lawyer. Send a simple letter on your letterhead.
Right.
Lawyer is going to charge another fee. Why you want to spend? Send a simple letter. You had promised to pay. Please pay that money. That's all. That acknowledgement due which will come from the postal authorities, staple it and keep it.
Okay. Now another question which always our hospital billing department faces, I know it's regarding recovery of finances ultimately. Usually the hospitals give us a 10% discount for senior citizens. That is one. Plus we do have CGHS, EGHS, PMC schemes, different corporation schemes which are running up. Can a hospital combine 2 or 3 schemes to make a particular bill for a particular, because the relatives always ask us, okay, I'm a senior, so he gets admitted under a PMC scheme where he gets a 50% discount up to 1.5 lakhs. Then he says, okay, up to 1.5 lakhs, X is the bill. Then plus my father is a senior citizen, add a top up of 10%. And plus over and above, he says, okay, so is it legally, can a hospital refuse? I know this is on compassionate ground. So this is a question I'm asking on behalf of plenty of hospital billing departments of the hospital. Can the hospital billing department say, no, you are entitled for billing only under this category of scheme?
So Dr. Dixit, for this, you look into all these online stores and all these. For all the concessions they give, they see this scheme cannot be tagged along with another scheme. So if the hospital has its own scheme of giving certain concessions, a very simple line in simple English, nothing beyond that. This is our scheme, and if you are tagging it with another scheme, it's not possible. So you are protected. Now, as to other schemes, whether they can be tagged, not tagged, that you will have to look to those respective departments.
Right.
CGHS, what is CGHS saying? Whether this much concession can be given over and above the concession that you are offering here, there. So those schemes you have to follow religiously. Your own schemes, you can always have such type of a very clarification clause. Yeah, our schemes will not be entertained if there is another scheme that you are taking. Enough.
Okay. There's another question for you, sir. Yes, you said no, if a facility is not available, it is our responsibility to transfer to the nearest possible safe center. So if the relatives say X safe center is not okay for me, I want to go to a Z center which is 10 kilometers away. Then who is responsible? Am I responsible for the transfer, or the relatives are responsible to the transfer to the Z hospital?
Immediately ask those relatives to write that thing on the medical records or whatever records you have prepared in emergency of that patient.
Okay.
Simple sentence. Who are you? Are you an uncle? Okay, fine. Can I have your identity card? Take a photograph. Please write down here you want to go to Z hospital.
Okay.
All your responsibilities come to an end.
Okay.
If that gentleman, see, ultimately they are the attendants, they are the caregivers. They are responsible for the patient. They don't want to go to X, they want to go to Y, let them go. It is their decision, not your decision.
Yes, sir. I agree. Now, just a last few closing remarks. Can you throw some lights into the intensive care, what we normally face here, on the end of life and withdrawal of support? That's what is, I know it's a very difficult question. Absolutely. So can you give us some guidelines to all, which is a very important question from the intensive care perspective, end of life or withdrawal from support? I do have got, okay, the son, one son is in America, another son is in India. The Indian son says, no, I cannot afford this treatment, please, this is enough. Now the American son sitting 10,000 kilometers away, he calls up and says, no, do everything for my father. I will transfer the money from there. So, and can the withdrawal of, suppose if says, okay, can it be bad? Normally we say that both the sons should sign, but one son is sitting abroad, one son is sitting here, just the son sitting here. Is it okay to take one sign, or should we have an email coming in from US saying that, so what is your opinion on this?
Dr. Dixit, withdrawal of life support is not permitted in India.
I completely agree.
For any reason whatsoever, rather very unfortunate, but that is it. Where life support can be withdrawn thanks to a judgment of the Honorable Supreme Court, where they have written extensively about how a living will has to be made, okay, and then how it has to be executed. Judicial magistrate first class happens to be the responsible officer in every district. A very elaborate procedure to withdraw life support. Okay, and I am sure till date, no hospital, no ICU in India has followed that procedure. Advanced medical directive is the term used by the Honorable Supreme Court. And while giving that judgment, the Supreme Court has said, please understand our handicaps. We are not a policy making body. But on this aspect, we want the government to make some laws. But as of now, please don't withdraw life support on emails, on written instructions from someone. You cannot do that. Unwritten, whatever is done, that is fine. But nothing can be proved in a court of law. Some unfortunate situations are there, but then unfortunately, law on this aspect is very clear. Either you follow that Supreme Court judgment, which is very procedure-wise, it can't be done as good as that. So, although the permission has been given, it is as good as not giving permission.
Okay, thank you. That clears.
But Dr. Dixit, one very important: don't document anything like this. The younger son says yes, older son has given an email saying no, and that is why I have withdrawn. I have seen many hospitals withdrawing life support based on these. Please don't do that.
Okay.
Documented absolutely nothing.
Right.
It's illegal.
Okay. Now another pertaining question, though this is related to in the COVID, though we have said we would like to avoid it. Whenever normally in the COVID wards or COVID ICUs now, no relatives are allowed to be there. This is the last question, and I'll hand it over to Hitesh. No relatives are available there. Is a valid counseling being done on the phone will be taken as a valid counseling? We normally call the relatives and inform ki, okay, your X or Y or Z is serious or very serious, and X is required, Y is required. We are trying to do dialysis, but things are not good. It is the counseling, what you do face to face and what you do on the phone is much different. So is this...
See, number one, don't tape record the telephone.
No, sir, but I don't record it. Majority of the time, the relatives only record it nowadays.
It is illegal. They will never be able to produce it in a court of law.
Okay, now if he records it, if he records it, is it mandatory for him to take my prior permission before recording?
Even with prior permission, probably he may not be able to record.
Okay.
Okay. Indian Telegraph Act says you can tape record a telephone call. For that, Home Secretary's permission is required. It can be only done in extraordinary cases, not otherwise.
Yeah.
So all those of us who just tape record telephones, we are doing something which is grossly illegal. Please understand that. One. Number two, there is no legal mandate to counsel a patient, except where you want to take consent. Pre-consent counseling is mandatory to a certain extent. Whatever you do in ICU, these are good practices, best practices. That's all. Nothing beyond that. So yes, counsel the patient's relatives. We are, today emails and SMSs are there. Ask them for a revert. It's good. You are more than transparent.
Absolutely. I agree. Thank you, sir. Thank you for throwing light and clarifying all these problems, what we really face day in and day out into intensive care unit. I'm really honored that you have taken out time out of your busy schedule from your Supreme Court plus the Law Institute, which you're running excellently. And I'm very happy to inform that, yes, we do have learned a lot from the medical legal courses, which is being benefited to all our ICCM members also. I thank the Indian Institute of Law. I also thank Bajpai sir for taking out time. And again, thank Concord for arranging this excellent webinar. And again, thanks for inviting me to moderate this session and have a face-to-face talk with Bajpai sir. I hand it over to Dr. Hitesh. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you, Mr. Bajpai, and thank you, Dr. Shubal Dikshit, for sparing your valuable time. And it was such a wonderful session. We got a lot of insights on the medical legal aspects of the healthcare practitioners. So thank you, sir, and we thank you on behalf of Concord Biotech Limited. Thank you, sir.